Hello everyone, we are Kim, Kirsten, Renee and Julike. In this video we will walk you through our research about the Sultans Trail. Behind me you see Vienna, the start of the Sultans Trail, a hiking and bicycle trail through Southeast Europe. The route has been established by the foundation The Sultans Trail, an NGO based in the Netherlands run by volunteers. The symbol the foundation chose for the Sultans Trail is Sultan Süleyman. He traveled to Vienna from Istanbul, what used to be called Constantinople. He traveled through the countries that are currently part of the trail, such as Hungary. He tried to conquer Vienna, but failed multiple times. Eventually, the Sultan died without ever succeeding. The foundation turns this rather cruel story into something positive. They say the Sultan's Trail is a path of peace and a meeting place for people of all cultures. The goal of the research was to determine the role of the Ottoman heritage in the Sultan's Trail to find out if improvements can be made in the field of storytelling. To achieve this goal, the main research question was the following. What is the role of the Ottoman heritage in the development of the story of the Sultan's Trail? A good narrative can bring locals and tourists together and create development opportunities. To answer the main research question and to achieve the goal, we conducted interviews with tourists who walk the trail and locals of the places the trail crosses. We asked them questions related to the secondary research questions. We used semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions to achieve the most complete view of the role of the Ottoman heritage in the development of the story of the trail. Structured interviews were held through email because it was less time-consuming for the tourist, and by then we found out which questions were the most useful. The interviews with locals were focused on the in-depth knowledge of the Ottoman Empire and how this knowledge is expressed on the Sultan's Trail. All the interviews took place online via Skype or other online video call platforms. For the data analysis, we used different online qualitative data analysis. First, we did a thematic analysis, then a frequency analysis, and a semantic analysis. With this study design, there are some limitations. Unfortunately, due to travel restrictions, it was not possible to go to the research area. Therefore, it was harder to find suitable representatives for the group of locals.
The first theme is about the personal interest in the story of the Ottoman heritage by tourists and locals. There's a difference in this interest. From the tourist, it can be seen that there is not a lot of interest in the story before walking the trail. Therefore, it is not the main motivation. However, whilst walking the trail, some interviewees gained more interest in the story. Therefore, it has been seen as a nice addition because it makes the trail more immersive. In contrast, the locals are more interested in the story of the Ottoman heritage. Everyone knows the basis of this part of history because it is taught in school. How the knowledge is further developed depends on the interest of the individual. Some people have had multiple conversations with family members who are also interested in this history. Others are less interested, but everyone is still aware of remains that come from the Ottoman Empire.
The second theme is about the experience the tourists experience in relation to Ottoman heritage during their trip. Overall, it doesn't seem like the addition of the Ottoman history was really important to the tourists. Those historical stories and experiences were more like an underlying and inseparable part of the trail. As you hear the responses of the former hikers, it doesn't seem to make sense if the historical story that belongs to the trail would have been a completely different story. They would have walked the trail anyways. However, most of them agree that the historical story that belongs to the Sultan's Trail is an interesting story, and as they learn more about it. When comparing the thoughts of the locals to the tourists, you see that in both groups the experience with and interaction of the Ottoman heritage differ per person, but they all treat respectfully. Another thing that stands out is that the role of the Ottoman history is way bigger for the locals than for the tourists. For the tourists, the Ottoman history is just a small part of their lives, and they don't have that big of a role during their trip.
The third theme includes the interaction between locals and tourists along the Sultan's Trail about the Ottoman heritage and its remaining culture. The tourists mentioned that they barely had any interaction with the locals about it. A reason for this could be the language barrier between the walkers and the tourists. Further, the tourists traveled in a group which could have decreased the amount of interaction with locals in general. This is supported by the locals who mentioned that they did not experience any contact with the tourists regarding the Ottoman heritage. Nonetheless, most of the interviewees mentioned that if there would be any tourists asking them about this, they would not hesitate and tell them about this part of history. But they would not mention all the details, and mainly how Bulgaria recovered from this. Locals are very aware of the remaining culture of the Ottoman Empire. The Muslim religion is one of the remains that can be found more evidently in the south. Another of other remaining cultural influence are the cuisine and the language. The cuisine is inspired by Turkish dishes, and many words of the Bulgarian language come from the Turkish language.
With theme 4, we came across some other features of the trail. During the interviews, we discovered that the interest of the Ottoman story didn't play a big part in the motivation to walk the trail. The features that motivated the tourists the most to travel the Sultans Trail and that were mentioned the most in the interviews were the beautiful nature and mountains, the different cultures and the different countries, but also the hospitable people and the fact that it's not busy visited by tourists. To locals, the topic of Ottoman heritage would be especially what interests them, but what story should be told best is still controversial. Besides that, they would like to see the difference between the identity of every different country along the way in the marketing of the Sultans Trail.
The historical story of the Ottoman Empire is a narrative that's used for and by the Sultans Trail and therefore considered as something important. However, when looking at the results we showed you, it becomes clear that this narrative does not turn out to be such a great and important asset after all. One reason for that is the fact that the story is simply not that important to attract tourists. The ex-walkers indicated that they were more attracted by the nature and culture of the region or by the fact that this long-distance trail is not yet as crowded as the more famous ones, like the one going to Santiago de Compostela, for example. However, on the other hand, the ex-walkers also view the story as a part of the identity of the trail, so it's a little contradicting. Then the next reason is the fact that locals are in fact attracted by the used narrative. They would love to use the trail as a tool to explore their own heritage further and also get familiar with how people in the other countries along the road view this part of history. However, the story also creates a problem. The story is really being romanticized and all of the worst bits like the massacres and slavery are not even mentioned. The locals do understand that for marketing purposes it would be good to not use all of these dramatic happenings, but they also do not feel comfortable with the fact that it's ignored. Then lastly, there's the fact that the contact between locals and tourists does not enhance the importance of the story along the route. Walkers tend to not really engage with the past of the history along the way. Therefore, the narrative used by the trail does not become more valuable. All in all, it can be concluded that the role of the Ottoman heritage is a contribution to the development of the Sultans Trail because it's considered as part of the identity and important to locals. However, it is currently not a factor that tends to attract tourists to walk the route. This does not mean that the story of the Sultans Trail should be substituted, but for the Sultans Trail to thrive, it would be good to add additional factors like the difference in culture, identity, and history of the different countries that are incorporated in the trail. This in order to improve marketing and attract the interest of possible walkers. So from this, we can take home that when traveling somewhere, no matter how much reading you did on the destination beforehand, remind yourself to go in there with an open mind. In that way, you will actually learn the real and complete story of the country, which could be really surprising. Thank you for listening.